Thank you, everyone. As I was introduced, my name is Shailesh. I'm the head of product at Sendbird. And I have to admit, this is the first time I'm actually back on stage at a conference in like 2 years. So I've forgotten what it's like, and I'm still a little nervous about it. But you guys are a great audience. Everyone's smiling. Thank you for that. So I'm the head of product at Sendbird, and Sendbird is a conversational platform for mobile apps. What that means is we provide a set of APIs and SDKs that allow you to incorporate user-to-user and brand-to-user chat within your application. And we make it super easy, and that's kind of our MO. As a product leader, I often have to make really difficult decisions that impact the growth trajectory of my company. Particularly as product managers, you have these decisions about what do we build, how fast do we build it, what technologies do we use to build it. And over the time, I've come up with a set of what I like to call frameworks that I use to guide the conversation. And today I'd like to share that framework with you and walk you through how I use that to have a really good conversation with my engineering colleagues around how we go about building new features, and particularly the build versus buy conversation. Now, the biggest concern that we all have is really kind of managing our team capacity. There's a survey that was done of about 800 software development professionals, and it was done by the organization called Tempo. I guess I left my clicker up there, so chalk 1 for nervousness. This survey of 800 software engineers was really interesting because they asked them what were the top issues that comes to mind. And no surprise, the biggest concern is how are we managing our team capacity? The respondents said that their top issues that came to mind are wasting time on mundane tasks that don't deliver value, right? The need to up-level the capacity of the engineering team with automation and with tooling. Next up was the use of legacy processes that are basically not reflective of today's tech stack. And the last one being the lack of talent or capacity needed to complete the necessary tasks. And yet, when Sendbird surveyed most organizations about kind of building versus buying, most organizations will tell you, no, we prefer to build in-house. And the primary reason of building in-house is really control and kind of agency over the entire process, fear of dealing with the vendor, and that ends up kind of locking them into a mode of thinking, which I think can sometimes end up in a suboptimal situation. So as tech companies, we know that we need to build. Many of us have good engineering teams. But there's, I think, more nuances to this, particularly in today's environment around resource constraints and kind of the proliferation of the API economy. But before we get into this, and I've had many of these conversations with my engineering colleagues, there's a couple of traps that you really need to avoid as you get into a discussion about how do we go about building this feature. So let me walk through a few of those real quick. First is confusing kind of strategic capabilities and features versus generic capabilities. And by this, I mean, is this the reason why someone is buying your app? This particular feature, is this going to be the differentiator? Versus, is this something that's kind of table stakes in your industry, right? Second, and this is probably a common thing with engineering teams, is you're ignoring the fact that you're already at capacity. In terms of your roadmap, we've got 2 years worth of things already lined up, and here we are discussing yet another new feature, right? I mean, it's important to pause and recognize that it's not that we have excess engineers just kind of sitting around thinking, what do we do, right? They're already committed to things. So the opportunity cost really needs to be considered here. Next, disqualifying solutions based on missing minor features. So often we do vendor evaluations. Sometimes it's not really done seriously. And there's a reason that you're looking for, a confirmation bias. Like, we don't really want to use a vendor. We really want to build this in-house. And you find one missing feature, and you're like, oh, can't do it. They're missing this one particular thing that we really want 2 years from now. be careful, because we're here to talk about what you need right now, rather than really trying to imagine 2-3 years worth of features. And the next one I'd say is underestimating the complexity. There's actually, I believe, a term called the Dunning-Kruger effect, something that my company CEO likes to talk about, which is that the less we know about something, the easier it seems to be, right? And that's kind of the way I feel when I watch NBA games, right? Here I am, 5'6", and I see these people pulling these three-pointers, and I'm thinking, that can't be hard, right? It looks so easy. But as we all know, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. And it applies actually to many things. So you've got to be humble about what you know and what you don't know, and really approach new things with some degree of caution. And I think the last thing is maybe something more that most of us are more familiar with, which is, you're downplaying. There's a tendency to downplay the ongoing costs. In software engineering, as we all know, there's no such thing as a one-and-done project, right? You've got bug fixes and releases. You've got, well, actually, every piece of software eventually is going to break, right? Something's going to go wrong, an API gets deprecated, and then you've got to rebuild this whole thing. There's test coverages that you need to write. And my favorite, the developer that built it leaves the company, right? And then you're stuck with code that nobody really understands, and then there's this scramble in the 2-week period to do a knowledge transfer. I just went through that. How do you frame the build decision? And this is where the part of my background, which is the MBA, which I don't really like to talk about, is really good about frameworks. So, a framework for me is like an easy couple of points that you can use out to really think through the decision. And in this case, based on our experience at Sendbird, there are these 6 critical considerations that really should guide your decision on how to build versus buy. And let me walk through those. The first is strategic. I alluded to this in the earlier example. Is this why customers buy from you, right? Is this feature really important to the competitive advantage that you've built up in the marketplace? Or is it, as I said, is it table stakes? The next one is timeline. Do you have the time to build this thing out? And if you think it's going to take, 20 days, 30 days, double it. Do you have that much time to bring this thing out to market? The third one is use case. Does your use case require a specialized user interface or a specialized workflow that your current team doesn't have the capability for? One example here would be recurring billing. Let's say you decide that you built this amazing application and now you want to bill on a monthly basis. It's really that simple as charging a fixed amount in your credit card that your customers have put up and just doing it every month. But it turns out there's so many different traps that go into building a UI around recurring billing. In fact, there's now plenty of companies whose main job is to create a recurring billing service for you. And there's a reason for that, because it's incredibly complicated once you get into all the details. The fourth one is regulation, right? Is there a security, compliance, or privacy concern built into your product? My favorite example from my time at Google was when you deal with consumers who are under the age of 13, there's a whole different set of requirements for storing the user data and how you secure it. And it is simply not apparent until you get into it how hard this is and the penalties for getting it wrong, right? So you've got to be, if you're thinking about this as a feature, you want to reach out to someone that already knows how to do it. The next one is budget, right? Do you have access to a large upfront budget to build this feature? And the reason I call it upfront is if you're going to invest the time to build a feature versus buying it on a SaaS basis from another vendor, the amount of money that you pay is large upfront if you're going to have to build this yourself, versus from a SaaS vendor, you're paying it over time. And the question is, does paying it over time match the revenue dynamics of your business? And it may make sense, in fact, to rent the service rather than building it up front to own it. And the last one I'd like to say is organization, which is, do you have the in-house talent and expertise to develop this software, maintain it for the lifetime of this service? Because if you don't, again, another thing to really think about is, should we be doing this? Putting it all together, frameworks, the decision criteria that we use, and we have a nice little acronym for it, it's called the S-Turbo framework. And because I'm a little bit of a quant nerd, there's a score attached to it, right? So we basically go through and ask these questions. And if you answer yes to any of these, you kind of put in a score of 1. If you say no, put in a score of 0. And you can kind of very quickly get a first pass of what the decision looks like. In many cases, an organization will fall somewhere in the middle. Should we be building versus not? And sometimes they end up taking a hybrid approach where you buy the building blocks, and then you invest a little bit on top to kind of customize it and build it to your own spec. So what I'd like to do is use a few real-world examples of this framework, some of them from our customers, and a few examples actually from our own. DoorDash is a customer of Sendbird, and they realized that the poor communication between consumers and the Dashers was a common cause of the food deliveries not actually getting to the customer in time. And they realized quite quickly that in-app chat could really solve this problem, and particularly by allowing the two parties to coordinate quickly in terms of the delivery. So the team at DoorDash had to decide whether to build this chat or whether to purchase it. And so let's apply kind of the S-Turbo framework for their use case and see kind of what it comes up with, right? So for DoorDash, chat was not strategic. Let's be clear. All of their competitors had it, right? Instacart has chat. Uber Eats has chat already. So this is more of a catch-up. With competition already offering this functionality, there wasn't a lot of time for DoorDash to really catch up. So there was a sense of time pressure. The delivery driver to customer chat did require some specialized workflows, and that's primarily because the Dashers are mobile. They're on the go, whether they're in a car or on a scooter. And as far as regulatory issues, not much there to really worry about. And they had the in-house expertise. DoorDash has an amazing engineering team. And if you read their blogs, they have some really sophisticated thinking around engineering infrastructure. But ultimately, DoorDash decided that they needed to build this thing in-house. Build it using Sendbird. And as they subsequently wrote a blog post about this, and their software engineer said, there's really no need to reinvent the in-app chat. Plenty of third-party solutions already existed to give DoorDash the building blocks it needed to develop this delivery driver to customer chat within the application. And by quickly implementing in-app chat between Dashers and customers, they reduced their never delivered rate, which was a key KPI, if you will, for them. This in turn saved the company money by reducing order cancellations and refund requests, thereby lowering the operational costs for the company. Let's use another example, Hinge. They are also a customer of ours and have been for quite a while. And they were contemplating how to offer voice and video chat inside of their mobile app. Hinge had considered adding voice and video before, but had never really prioritized it. And when the pandemic happened, video quickly went from a nice-to-have feature to a must-have feature. And the Hinge's product managers discovered that many of their users were coordinating on Hinge, but then moving to Zoom to have these virtual dates. And they had a requirement around building user engagement and keeping people within the brand. And so they needed to add voice and video calls inside of their branded experience really quickly. In this case, the video dating feature was strategic for them. It became strategic suddenly over time. But they had no time to wait and to really plan out how to build this thing. And so they decided to use Sendbird's voice and video APIs. And they were able to launch a video chat feature in 5 markets within 5 weeks, right? So time was a primary consideration for them. And that's really what they said is like, look, we had a trusted relationship with Sendbird. We had a strong intuition that this could get done quickly, and that trumped everything when it came to our decision about how we were going to go about building voice and video services. Next, I actually want to use an example within Sendbird. This is kind of a personal example. Many of our customers have asked us to build a polling feature within in-app chat, right? It's like a really easy way to create engagement. You ask them a question, a bunch of people respond. Who's your favorite team? What kind of ice cream are you eating? And so on. So a lot of customers came to us. They said, hey, can you add a polling feature in your chat so that we can use that to really create more engagement? And to be honest, when I, as a PM, I always think of my job primarily as saying no. And a lot of customers came in and said, hey, we want to have this chat. And I said, no, it seems kind of trivial. And there's so many other services out there that you can really use. So our response to that in the PM team became, look, here's how you can build it yourself. You can use these Sendbird APIs. Here's an extension capability that allows you to take Sendbird's chat, take the polls from another company, and really bring it together. And that was our answer for the longest time. But as things happened, we fast forwarded 6 months, and our business started to really resonate in healthcare. So we started to get a lot of healthcare customers. And no surprise, one of them came to us and said, we want the ability to survey our patients via your chat, right? Now, it turns out that the survey requirements are very similar to the polls requirements. And the initial reaction was going to be the same. However, it turns out for healthcare, this is a really strategic feature. And it requires a specialized workflow. And there are really important regulatory concerns. If you're going to use the survey to disclose medical information, all of a sudden, it's not really a frivolous thing about which flavor of ice cream you like, but actually something that's governed by HIPAA, right? So in this example, a feature that wasn't really that interesting and not core to our capabilities, because of the different circumstance of our customers and the momentum that we started to experience in healthcare, it became a thing that we actually ended up having to build. So it's not just a static thing, right? You always have to reevaluate this. So this is really the end of my presentation. But I think the most important point is that these conversations that you are going to have as PMs with your engineers, these are common ones, right? Should we build and should we buy? And these kind of 6 things that we have, these 6 questions, and our S-Turbo framework is a really nice way to kind of structure the conversation. So I hope you get to use it, and happy to continue the conversation at our booth. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you so much for sharing that framework. I think in your first 2 examples, there was that score of 3, which was right in the middle. So is there like a prioritization in that S-Turbo that you would probably recommend? Like look at time always first, or something else that would come first?
Sure. So I'd say first, don't get too wedded to the score itself. I think it's a good way to engage people in the conversation. By people, I mean your stakeholders. And ultimately, what is your company OKR? Again, from my Google days, very much about, what is our top line objective? And, if revenue is your objective or winning new logos is your objective, is there a way to justify time to market, as maybe the first and the primary consideration? So that would be my thing. Like, time to market for me is actually really important.
Yes, right over there.
How do you evaluate between buy versus build for this particular use case versus opportunity sizing for all the other use cases that you might face?
So let me see if I can repeat that. So you have opportunity cost for all of the features that you're building, and then you're evaluating a build versus buy for a new feature. Is that correct?
No, for the same feature, should I evaluate build versus buy for a particular use case, or also consider all the future possible use cases, just like the healthcare poll example? So how do you evaluate at the right moment and then decide build versus buy?
I'd say it's important to evaluate based on what you know at this moment in time. There is again, a lot of this is personal experience, but we sometimes get caught up in overthinking about the problem, trying to create a larger story around it. And one of the things that I've learned over time is kind of early wins are important, and they build their own momentum. And especially to folks on my team, when we talk about whether we should get started, should we take extra long to build this feature, or should we build it rough and ready and just put it out in the market? I have a bias towards getting to the market first, seeing the early adoption, and then using that to actually gauge further investment.
Other questions? Other questions? Yes.
How would you evaluate the same proposition that when it comes to wanting to give a vendor a lot of power, so you purchase a lot of features, much to say a vendor, and then helping you build out features rather than keeping some in-house? That way, the vendor doesn't own, a lot of the stuff when it comes to your product. How would you evaluate the differences between
Right.
building and design when it comes to that?
If I understand that correctly, how do you think about vendor lock-in,
Yes.
right? And vendor lock-in is important. I agree. I think again, it's a very subjective thing. If you are an early stage company rushing to get to product market fit, thinking about vendor lock-in is a luxury that you probably don't have, right? Bigger companies, larger enterprises, spend a lot of time really thinking about vendor lock-in. And again, if your bias is towards let's get something to market quickly, evaluate the product market fit, and then decide further investments, if that's your framework, then I would say I would not worry as much about vendor lock-in right now. Just make sure that there's a business. There's no point, building something because you're worried about vendor lock-in, investing a whole bunch of resources upfront, and then realizing that actually that area we didn't have a product market fit. Right? Really take a step-by-step approach, especially in fast-moving, dynamic environments that is in today's tech. Taking a long time to build it right using our in-house resources is too often you're going to end up in a situation where what you built isn't really ready for the market or is not getting adopted by the market. So take it step by step.
So one of the questions that we've got in front that someone submitted in is, what are your thoughts on how on a unique industry, how someone in a unique industry can approach the framework, especially if on the builder side they don't have the industry expertise?
Right. In some sense, it becomes easier, right? If you don't have the capability in-house, then you're really, in some sense, relying more on vendors. And I think at this point, you should be thinking about more strategic relationship with your vendors, right? Really bring them into the conversation early on, discuss your goals, and figure out if they are a match for you, not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of their ability to support you, the kind of resources that they would bring to bear, post-sale support, Slack support. These are all the things that start to matter. So I think if anything, if you are less technically sophisticated, it becomes more of an imperative to choose a vendor carefully and to really build on top of other solutions.
All right, I think we've got time for one more question. And so for this one, again, from Slido, and again, please keep submitting the questions in through Slido. Helps keep some of the conversation going. What are, for an established company, how does brand play into the framework?
I guess I'm not sure whether it's the vendor's brand or the company's brand that we're talking about here.
Go with both.
Yeah, all of the above. Well, let's talk about vendor brand. Part of your calculus is, do I go with a vendor maybe that's less reputable, that has less experience, but maybe is more hungry and more willing to kind of work with me, right? Versus someone that has the experience and has done this before. And we often face that at Sendbird. The unique journey of this company, it's now, I think its entire life, it's 7, maybe 8 years old. And for the longest time, we were the upstarts, right? We were competing against much larger companies. And it's interesting that now we fast forward and we are considered the incumbent because we've been around for the longest time. The differentiating factor now isn't cost. There are always going to be cheaper vendors who will come to you and say, we'll give it at a lower cost. The question I think now is one of experience. How much of the experience that the vendor has is available to you that you can learn off this so that you aren't going to make the same mistakes? So I used the previous example, not of Sendbird, but let's use the example of recurring billing in case you decide to build a SaaS product. There's a lot of knowledge and experience and mistakes built into the offering that the vendor has. Because they've seen this problem before, they've seen the fraud before, they've figured out how to mitigate it. And all of that is baked into the product that is now available to you. And that is an example where potentially going with someone that has been around for a long time and has seen all the mistakes that happen and all the issues that there are, going with them actually means that you're building on top of their experience and you're getting it, in some sense, baked into the price of the product.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.